again. So today we're doing a two-part episode. The first half is going to be why crossovers are so popular. And we have a few reasons behind that. It's definitely going to be a conversation with you guys. And then the second part, Andre?
The second part has to do with what are manufacturers doing to improve fuel efficiency in crossovers specifically. And behind us is our 2017 Mazda CX-5, which is fully redesigned.
That's right.
And it's a great example of some of the things we're talking about.
It's an outstanding example because it is considered, in terms of Mazda altogether, one of the most efficient car companies that's selling in the United States. And they're doing it without a diesel, without hybrids, without a plug-in, and without an electric vehicle. So it's all based on the technologies that they're using. So this is one of their newest vehicles, so we'll be talking about that on the second half of this broadcast. So for those of you who are out there, can you let us know if you can hear us?
Yeah, and I think the sound is much better now, you guys are saying. And thank you for joining Matthew and Daniel and Philip and Will and Jose and James and Chris and Will. So thank you guys for joining so much.
Yeah, we appreciate it. At the end of the broadcast, or near the end, we'll start answering your questions. So if you have some questions, or if you want to be part of the conversation.
And comments.
Wait till towards the end of this, which will be in 20 minutes, and then we'll be able to use the computer and hopefully answer a whole bunch of your questions.
Yeah, so why are crossovers so popular? And the CX-5 is actually Mazda's best-selling vehicle.
The CX-5 is a really good example of why crossovers are so popular. Now, bottom line is there's a certain thing to be said about the look, the feel, the statement of a crossover, because in many cases, people who buy them are basically looking for something like a big hatchback. I mean, that's really what they are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't want it to look like a big hatchback. They don't want it to say hatchback or minivan. They want it to say, I'm adventurous, or I go skiing, even if you don't. So that's part of it, right?
Yeah, and also utility. So you mentioned the hatchback part, and the hatchback is useful. You know, you can put the seats down.
Oh yeah.
You can put a lot of cargo, and actually, because of that body style, you can also put a lot of people in there as well.
That's right. And let's not forget that, you know, it's a vehicle that is very comfortable to drive, and the reason why, and this has been a huge reason for the sales success, you have an elevated seating surface. And there are an awful lot of people out there who are very grateful for not having to either climb up into one or fall into one. They can actually just swing their butt over and drop it a bit or lift it a bit, and they're in the seat. And I gotta tell you, I have family who have actually purchased these things specifically because they're so comfortable to drive and because of your high seating position, you're able to look over other cars. So that's actually a very big reason that these vehicles sell.
Yeah, the egress is a big part of it. You know, you just open the door, you slide in, and hey, I'm in my crossover, and I can go do whatever I want. And of course, the other part is all-wheel drive capability. A lot of these have all-wheel drive options, actually all of them.
All of them, yeah, that are considered actual crossovers. And, you know, all-wheel drive is kind of a give and take. Nowadays, you're able to, you know, have an all-wheel drive system that isn't that painful to run because you only lose like 1 or 2 mpg.
Mm-hmm.
And the Mazda's a pretty good example of that. You lose a couple mpg if you go all-wheel drive from the front-wheel drive, and also keep in mind that they are heavier when they're all-wheel drive. But with that being said, you're still able to go in the snow a lot easier. You put snow tires on it, you can go almost anywhere. All-wheel drive capability, all-weather capability. Those are things that are very important to an awful lot of people who buy these vehicles.
And a lot of people buy them because Mazda sold over 8,000 CX-5s in March, and it's their #1 seller. It even sells more than Mazda 3 sedan.
Yeah, and if you think about it, you know, this is a much more expensive vehicle to build. It's a much more expensive vehicle to sell. Mazda, and we'll get to this on the second half of this broadcast, but Mazda's really shown that they're kind of lighting the way for small, fairly inexpensive crossovers. And we'll get to some of the other ones in a minute.
Yeah.
But there's one final thing, and this is something we discussed. I know a lot of you guys agree with us or agree with others. There are a lot of people who hate crossovers, who find them to be annoying and useless. Some people think that they're just fat station wagons, which to a certain degree they are, or overweight hatchbacks. And that the only reason they exist is in order to make people look like they're more outdoorsy or whatnot. And you know what? To some extent, that's true. There are an awful lot of vehicles out there that, frankly, could easily be a station wagon or a hatchback with all-wheel drive. Mm-hmm. I think that Mazda's actually touched on that with the CX-3. That's much closer to actually being an all-wheel drive hatchback.
Yeah.
Obviously, Subaru's been doing it for a while with the Impreza. And if you look at the Impreza and then the XV Crosstrek, those things are the same car, just one's higher than the other. So it's a question of attitude and it's a question of looks, and yeah, in many cases, people really dislike them. But because of their existence, they're outselling just about everything else out there.
And Mazda is huge on driver-centric performance, right? You know, they talk about how the steering wheel is perfectly matched with the seat and the driver, and you have a heads-up display.
Yep.
And you have a lot of driver-centric technology, suspension setup.
The steering feel too.
The
is
steering
quite
feel,
good.
and also how responsive the engine is. And this is a brand new model, the 2017 CX-5. It's using a 2.5 liter Skyactiv engine, and this Skyactiv term is Mazda's term for not only of engines, but overall the whole chassis and how they design vehicles.
That's right, but with the engine, it's a super high compression four-cylinder. And that's all the Skyactiv line does that. It's 13:1 is actually the ratio. Now, what that means for those of you who don't quite know is basically that's the amount of explosion that happens in terms of how much
And the space and
and
the
the
cylinder.
and the
Yeah,
space
yeah.
in the cylinder. So the bottom line is that that's similar to the way a diesel works in terms of that high compression level. And that does allow the engine to work in a much more efficient way at a higher temperature and thus better gas mileage and good power. This one puts out 187 horsepower and 185 pound-feet of torque. This has a 6-speed automatic transmission, and I always thought that was strange, and we'll get to this in just a bit in terms of MPG stuff that we're gonna talk about in just a moment. But everybody else is going to 7, 8, 9, and even 10 speed automatic transmissions and CVT, continuously variable transmissions. So it's strange.
Yeah, it is a little strange. And I went to the launch event of the CX-5, and their engineering is so involved, right? And what they've done, what you get with a high compression engine, which you don't want, is potential for knocking.
Yes.
Basically, you can get an explosion at a time where you don't expect an explosion in the cylinder because of the high compression and the heat that builds up. And what Mazda did is actually they kind of trimmed the crown of the cylinder head itself to relieve some of the pressure a little bit more, but still maintain high compression.
Right.
And so they do a lot of work on this.
Yeah, and you know, we do talk a lot about Mazda, and we're usually pretty positive, and the reason why, the bottom line is that they really do try to build cars for drivers. Look, I've owned 3 of them, my wife currently drives one. The reason why is because I think that for the price, it's the best driving car out there and a very efficient one. So that's another thing.
But number 5 on the list
Right.
of efficiencies, right?
Yeah.
Is actually weight and actually keeping the weight low. The lower the weight, the easier it is to get the vehicle moving, and the more efficient it is, right?
Yeah, and here's the crazy part about it. Well, this vehicle behind us, they did do a lot of weight saving, but you know which company has been doing some really extraordinary work with weight saving? GM.
Yep, yeah, they have.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some of their crossovers and SUVs, well, crossovers basically, where they've cut out up to 700 pounds.
Yeah, let's go down the list real quick. The Acadia dropped almost, like you said, 700 pounds. The new Traverse, the new Equinox, GMC Terrain that's coming out. They're using, they're downsizing some of the vehicles and some not.
Yeah, and some are basically the same size, but
Yeah.
they just found lighter, strong materials, super high strength steels, aluminums and whatnot. And another company that's doing a ton of aluminum in their trucks is, of course, Ford.
Yeah.
And Ford has managed to take out, once again, about 700 pounds in some of their trucks, or 300 or 400 in the bigger ones.
Right.
And it is paying off because you're able to put more power on the road because you're not using that power to lug the vehicle around. So I guess we're on our fuel economy half now.
Yeah.
So this half of the conversation really is dealing with what companies are doing, not just with vehicles, but specifically also these things behind us. Because, let's face it, it is not as low as you would want for an efficiency vehicle. I mean, the Mazda...
It is high off the ground. Yeah.
It's high off the ground. This one is 7.6 inches off the ground. That's its minimum ground clearance. And you need ground clearance in order to have a proper crossover or an SUV, so you can drive over obstacles, snow, and all that.
And curbs.
And curbs. Yeah, that's why my wife needs one of these. So the bottom line is that this vehicle is not as aerodynamic. The 2016 version of this had a CDA of 0.33, and that's drag coefficient. So That's how efficiently the wind passes over the vehicle, for those of you who don't know. And in general, this vehicle, it's pretty aerodynamic, but remember, if it were lower and it had a lower hood and if it was closer to the ground, it would have a much better drag coefficient.
Yeah, and aerodynamics is huge, right?
Yeah.
Companies spend a lot of time in the wind tunnels and computer simulations and real-world testing to get the perfect CD without actually losing a lot of the interior space. Because what you actually want to do is slope the roof down
Right.
when the vehicle, at the end of the vehicle.
You might be seeing a lot of that too nowadays.
Yeah.
You'll see it with hybrids especially. Those things are teardrop shaped. But they don't want these things to look exactly like that because you do want rear end space. And the few times they've done that, I think the Nissan Juke is a really good example of a vehicle where you have the high roof and then it slopes back kind of harsh, and it does a couple things in a negative sense. It impedes
Headroom.
on interior space, and frankly speaking, it makes the design a specific one that you have to stay. You can't really move around with that design. You basically have that, and there's no other way around it. However, if you do what Mazda and Ford and Chevrolet have done, they've managed to make a much better grille hood area that is very aerodynamic, and they've still kept the box shape while just slightly lowering the back.
Yeah, and Mazda is doing a lot of interesting things with their cars. For example, they're refusing to put panoramic sunroofs in their crossovers, and we
Wait.
asked them why, and they said wait.
Yep.
I think it's also, you have to put a lot more resources into designing different roof
Yeah.
structures, and Mazda is still a relatively small company.
They're
right?
actually teeny, and they're on their own. They used to have a partnership with Ford, and they used to build, actually, believe it or not, they even built Volvos to a certain degree. But the thing about Mazda is they're pretty much all independent. So what they've done is they've gone all in on design. They've gone all in on engineering. And this is what's really impressive about this car company. Once again, for those of you who weren't with us at the very beginning, Mazda has managed to become the most fuel-efficient car company selling in North America. They do not have electric cars, they do not have plug-in hybrids, they don't have regular hybrids, they don't have diesels, at least not yet. We hear a
Not
rumor.
in the United States.
Yeah, now that may come later. But the point is that in the United States, they pretty much have lightweight vehicles that have the SkyActiv technology, and because of that, they are considered one of the most efficient automakers right here in the United States.
It is a pretty amazing feat.
It is, considering once again how small they are. So that's why we were drawing attention to it, and that's why we brought this in here. So let's get to something that's a little bit weird.
Number three.
Number three,
Number three is tires.
tires.
Yes.
Um,
So tires are very important, obviously,
But
because that's what touches the ground.
Well, exactly, and that gives you traction, blah, blah, blah. Now, for those of you who are not aware, and it's pretty obvious, when you have a high-efficiency vehicle, you tend to have very narrow tires. Look at the BMW i3, it looks like it has motorcycle tires. And one of the things about them is they're very solid, and they offer very little rolling resistance. And that way, they're more efficient as they spin, and they try to make them lightweight, so there's less mass for the vehicle to spin. Because of all that, they get better mileage. However, there's a problem. If you have a crossover or an SUV,
And you want to go in the dirt, in the snow, in the wet, right?
then I can't speak English right now. Go for it.
It's okay. Well, basically, you have a conflict, right? You want grip, but you don't want rolling resistance because knobby tires, they're hitting the ground, and there's more rolling resistance there.
They're
And-
clawing at the ground, and that's what makes the rolling resistance.
Yeah, and Mazda is using Toyo tires here. And yesterday I was in the Rocky Mountains. I
Yeah.
was driving around in this car,
Mhm.
and it was a freak blizzard snowstorm.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I actually went into this parking lot. It was a lot of fun, and actually these tires offer really good grip. And the all-wheel drive system, which is our next point,
Yes.
was working really well. There was about, 3 to 5 inches of snow in this parking lot. I never got stuck. I stopped, I tried to get stuck, kept going.
Trust me, if anybody knows snow, it's a Russian. So yeah, but the reality is that there's a fine balance between having low rolling resistance tires and having tires that have enough grip to move you but still be efficient. So far, these have proven to be excellent tires. And Mazda is an interesting car company for one other reason. I'll add to this list here, which, well, it doesn't really count. Mazda puts snow tires on their vehicles during the winter, the ones that they lend to journalists.
Yep.
They're the only car company that does that consistently. So It's an odd thing because a lot of you out there do not buy cars and put snow tires on them, which you should if you live in snow country, frankly. You know, half the year. But Mazda does it because their point of view is we're going to educate people and let them know how important it is to have snow tires. So, Andres managed to go in the face of convention and still took it into the snow with the regular tires it comes with and did just fine.
Because that's what I do. I push the limits always, right?
Okay, so let's move
Okay.
on to the all-wheel drive system, and that's another thing that makes this vehicle unique.
Yeah, Mazda is spending, once again, a lot of engineering time on the all-wheel drive system. Not only does it have to be a good all-wheel drive system, but it has to be efficient.
And sporty.
And sporty, right, and sporty. And what Mazda is doing is what they're calling predictive all-wheel drive, where they're calling it AWD, where it's mainly front-wheel drive under easy conditions, rolling on the highway in a dry condition. And then it's using different factors, you know, how cold it is, how aggressive the driver is being, slip in different wheels, to engage very, very quickly within a few, you know, milliseconds. I mean, the exact time is, of course, you know, they don't want to specify sometimes, and it's sometimes difficult to know, but very, very, very quickly engage all-wheel drive system so it's seamless for the driver.
That's right. So in other words, they're trying to mitigate drag on the entire system while it's driving during regular, you know, driving. But when it detects a little bit of slip, cold temperatures, a whole bunch of other variables, it will kick into a wheel that can grip and help you move. And we've tested this in the snow. Where were we? Up in
the Crested Butte.
Crested Butte. And we actually got a chance to test these vehicles in the snow with the new predictive all-wheel drive system, and they did very well. They actually surprised us. And they had, against these vehicles, Subaru, Honda, and something else. I think Ford.
Maybe a Ford, yeah.
I think it was Ford. So yeah, it's a good system, and it's one that we've used before, and apparently it worked really well when you were playing yesterday in the snow.
Yeah, it did.
Now that kind of moves right into our final point, which is definitely the most important part, powertrains.
Yeah, and we already discussed the Mazda's powertrain, right?
Mhm.
They're going for high compression, non-turbocharged mainly.
Mainly.
The CX-9 is turbocharged.
It is turbocharged, and the thing moves really nice. It's they're all, at least in the United States, it's their only turbo offering currently available, and they're doing it with super high compression, which was one of the things we didn't think they would be able to do very easily.
Yeah. So, but powertrains are obviously where the magic happens for fuel efficiency.
Absolutely.
A lot of manufacturers are going to downsizing their engines,
Yep.
right? They're turbocharging engines. Once again, look at Ford and GM and FCA.
Oh, yeah.
Across the board. Even
Across-
Honda. Honda is turbocharging.
Honda, yeah, which was really surprising. Now they're throwing that 1.5 turbo in everything now.
Which is a great little engine.
It is a great little engine. But actually, Honda's a very good example of a company that's using different powertrains. Honda uses a continuously variable transmission in their CR-V. I had a chance to sample it when it just came out. I gotta tell you, I've been warming up to CVTs because they are getting better. Because they're acting like automatic transmissions.
Okay.
I know, and it always sounds like it's like a backhanded compliment. I'm not trying to make it that way. Older CVTs, Nissan's a good example. Back in the day, they were one of the earlier companies to start using them throughout the line, and they had a lot of slack to them. They didn't sound great, they didn't feel great, and even though they were efficient, acceleration was compromised. Now, the new ones are much better. They engage faster. They feel like they're keeping within the meat of the RPM where you really want that good torque. And Honda's a really good example of that with the CR-V. It is one of the best CVTs I've tried in a crossover that competes directly with this. Mazda's only using a 6-speed automatic transmission.
And the manual in some cars. Yeah.
It's a front-wheel drive version
Right.
of this, the old one at least, you could do that. So why are they doing that? Well, MPG, I had the Moroni right here, combined in the all-wheel drive version of this vehicle is 26 miles per gallon. That's really good.
And I got, over the last week, driving the car, 27.6 average.
And he has a fairly lead foot, and we're at high elevation, so
Yeah.
those things usually make it hard for vehicles to match these numbers. It actually did better. So there are other vehicles out there that are other examples. Right now, FCA is on top of transmissions, giving you 9-speed automatic transmissions in their small crossovers, mainly the Fiat 500X, and of course Jeep Renegade, and now the new Compass. those vehicles had the 9-speed automatic transmissions, which are very efficient. They seem to be doing much better initially when they first came out with those transmissions.
There were some
quality issues, some glitches. They've flashed them, they've reprogrammed them, they're much better now. But the bottom line is that they went towards a different direction, and instead of going CVT or 6-speed, old school, boom, 9-speed.
Yeah, and Mazda is still kind of staying a little bit old school, right? 6 speeds and also manual transmissions with a lot of drivers, people who love driving also like.
Yeah.
But Honda is one of those companies that are actually, it's using, they have hybrids, they have fuel cell vehicles now.
Yep.
So the Honda Clarity, they have a full sort of spectrum.
And Roman loves that vehicle, by the way.
I'm not quite sure why.
Yeah, he's a weird old man.
I haven't had a chance to drive a Clarity.
Yeah.
So maybe if I jump in there, I might love it. But I haven't driven it.
But they've also got a different type of transmission set up in their Honda Accord hybrid. The plug-in hybrid is a direct drive unit.
So actually there's almost like 2 transmissions in some way.
Right.
One that's connecting the electric motor to, and the combustion motor, actually.
And because of that, and the way they set it up, it's still one of the most efficient vehicles in its class. And we're talking over 50 miles per gallon.
In a big sedan.
Yeah, in a big sedan. And it's really impressive stuff. Other car companies are going a different route. Some of them are building electric vehicles. Nissan's another good example. They've had the Nissan Leaf on the road for a long time, and they've been progressively making it better and better, having better range. I believe it's up to 111 miles now, which is a pretty good amount of range. Prices are very competitive for the vehicle, and it's basically a good little small car. I've driven probably half a dozen of them so far. Great vehicle, but range anxiety. Other vehicles, and that's not really a crossover. But what about the Chevy Bolt? It's sort of a crossover, right? At least they make it look like it.
It's a tall hatchback thing.
And
it's not all-wheel drive.
No, it's not, but it is electric. And then the Kia Niro, which is front-wheel drive, it also kind of looks like an SUV, right?
And it's a hatchback, and it's kind of tall.
So there's almost every form of technology that's currently available, they're putting in one vehicle or another, and then there's something exciting that's coming. Actually, GM of all companies is bringing diesels.
Yeah, this is a sensitive subject. I've been a fan of diesels for a very long time.
Yeah.
I have a 2002 VW TDI Golf, and I still have it. Mazda is promising a turbo diesel in North America and the United States.
Which they've done before.
They've promised before, and they did not deliver on that. So I'm a little comprehensive on this.
Yeah, I think it has to do with Volkswagen and the stuff they pulled earlier on. And frankly, I think that Mazda, because of that and other reasons, backed away from it. And now it sounds like they're considering doing it again.
We'll see. We'll show you the Mazda, and the fuel door actually has a provision for DEF tank.
Yeah.
So, obviously this car is available with diesels in other markets.
Well, why don't we show them now? We're starting to wind it down a bit.
Yeah.
Show them, and then we'll answer questions after we show you two
While
things.
we're walking around.
Yeah, so I'm going to go pop the hood.
But those are the top 5 fuel efficiency technologies.
Right.
So,
and add to that, guys, if you think of anything else or anything that's coming around the corner, please add to the conversation. So, but let's get to this next part.
So let me get the, why don't you pop the hood?
Yeah,
and keep your comments and questions coming. And first, we're going to do a quick walk around.
By the way, I'm not a big fan of the color red on cars, but this is an absolutely awesome red. It's one of their newest colors from Mazda, and it's just delicious. Kind of a candy apple thing. Almost looks like it's professionally done, or wrapped. Right. There we go.
So there's this Kayactiv engine, huh?
Now there's a 2-liter version of this as well, which obviously is not as powerful. This is the 2.5 liter. And yeah, there's not much you can tell by just looking under the hood of the vehicle of what's going on. However, I can say this, lightweight, except for one spot.
The hood itself.
The hood, it feels like they deliberately threw all the weight into it. Andre believes that it has to do with them cutting, kind of cutting a few corners. Because this thing is like hard, heavy steel. We thought it would be aluminum to save weight, but aluminum is expensive. So there you go.
Yeah, and price, of course, is a big aspect of any vehicle,
Yeah,
right?
this one is around $34,000, fully loaded.
Yeah, and it has
started just over $24,000 for these. And this vehicle has every possible option you can put in a Mazda. Let me pop the gas cap here. Ta-da!
Here it is.
All right, now what Andre was talking about was the second point right here.
Yeah, there's a provision for another filler, basically.
Yep. So it seems like that would be where they would have the diesel and or possibly a DEF. I don't know if they're using DEF or not, to be honest with you. So yeah, we know that overseas they do provide a diesel option, which I believe is a 2-liter diesel.
Can you open up the door? Let's show the interior a little bit.
Yeah, they have really upped their game with their interior. Much nicer than before.
Yeah, and this, of course, is using sort of basically this white leather, which looks great. It may have a little bit of issue with staying clean.
This is coming from the father of 2 children, and I am as well, and I totally agree with him. But at the same time, it looks fantastic. They're using really 3 different tones. You know, if you look at the woods, and everything has almost a handcrafted feel to it. And for a car that is as inexpensive as this one is, that is impressive. And then on top of that, really excellent gauge placement. All the components feel expensive. They've gotten rid of almost all the cheap plastics.
Yeah, and here's the where the heads-up display unit is, which is great. You can see it right there, and it shows information like blind spot monitoring information.
Blind spot monitoring and everything else on this. Now, there are other vehicles that actually have a little pop-up for heads-up display, but this one is the old school where it actually beams onto the windshield, and it works really well.
It's very clear, and of course, it's also showing information for adaptive cruise control and lane keep. And let me show you the radar system here, which is actually a lot of manufacturers are doing now. They're hiding the radar behind their logo.
That's right. So in this logo, they actually have part of it, and the other half of it is up there.
Is the camera system as well.
Yeah, a lot of cars are doing that now as well.
And the CX-5 actually has some recognition for road signs. So, for example, stop signs and speed limit signs. It will actually
see it.
And communicate to the driver what the speed limit is, or if there's a stop sign coming up.
That's right. So they are on the cutting edge with a lot of other car companies, but they're doing it sort of on their own. And it's great to see them borrow the tech they need. They need one more thing, I think, before they're really at, super high level, and that is an all-around view, bird's eye view camera system, which Nissan basically started and has been perfected over the years. A lot of other car companies are now using that. So let's get to the questions. We have to start dialing this down. So
Sure.
let's see what we got
Here's
here.
one question, Nathan, about dealership network. Mazda does not have a big network dealership. Why is that?
Well, it's bottom line, small car company. It's expensive to have a large dealership network, and Mazda's on their own now. They no longer have the support of Ford or anybody else. They're all on their own. So when you have a big city that has, for every 5 Toyota dealerships, 1 Mazda dealership, which I think is a fair amount on a big city, that's the reason why. Now, for us right here in Colorado, there are 2 Mazda dealerships that we use. Once again, my wife has a Mazda. So, and we only go there for maintenance and whatnot. It's always a recommendation for people who want to keep the parts directly from the manufacturer. And yeah, it's kind of a pain in the neck, especially if you're living in a rural area where dealerships are hard to come by in general. That's a problem, but it's a small car company. And hopefully as their fortunes improve, they will have more dealerships. And a really good example of that is Subaru. Subaru has a lot more dealerships now. They are also independent. And they went from being just as scarce, if not more so, than Mazda, all the way to being fairly plentiful, especially in the snow country. All right, what do we got next? He's using this.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the chat window, and thank you guys for all your participation and comments and questions. There's one question about, that says, or comment actually, that says, if drivers paid attention, you wouldn't need adaptive cruise control or lane keep assist.
Oh, of course. I mean, that's the big if, though. And this goes to a much larger question, which is what we'll cover probably in another live broadcast. How much do you take away from the driver when they're screwing up before the car kicks in? How much intelligence?
I gotta say, though, I kind of like adaptive cruise control systems, and this Mazda behind me actually has a very good, it doesn't accelerate quite as aggressively as I would like, but for braking, it does a really good job. It's smooth at braking.
And it goes all the way to zero, yeah?
It goes all the way to zero, and actually it will hold the car there in traffic at stop. But you have to push the gas pedal to accelerate and keep going.
From a dead stop.
From a dead stop.
Yeah, not
And
all
then
car companies do that.
And then it takes over
Yeah.
again, and it's happy. Also corrects, the steering wheel corrects when you're wandering, if you're wandering in your lane on the highway. I don't like that system quite as much because, well, first of all, if you can steer, why don't you just take over and drive?
Right.
You know, there's that part for me. But also, it's just weird. It's weird when the car is trying to correct what I'm doing. Okay, I'm driving and I know, obviously, all drivers should pay attention, but this comment goes to the heart of that issue, why these technologies here.
Well, the bottom line is this, though, the reason they exist. The fewer car accidents that happen on roads means that insurance prices will not rise too greatly. In fact, they'll drop a little bit. Also, it means that car companies will be less liable for incidences because they've done everything they can to prevent the car from crashing. Volvo's a really good example of that. They want to have 0 fatalities by the year 2020, I think it is. And they want to do that by using a mixture of a very safe vehicle and then all of these nannies. Do I like them? No. I actually shut off just about everything when I'm doing regular commuting, but when I go cross country or on a long drive, I actually use a few of them now. I'm getting spoiled, especially the radar cruise control. Finding somebody who I think is, oh, okay, he's driving just the way I would, drop behind him, turn it on. It does two things. One, it actually makes you a little bit more efficient because you're not stabbing and then deaccelerating and stabbing. The car is much more refined when it actually accelerates. And the other thing is, it kind of keeps you on task and makes it less likely that you'll get a speeding ticket.
Well, it's also less tiring.
Yeah.
Right, if you're driving across a state and you're driving for several hours and you're constantly adjusting your speed, maintaining everything, it kind of wears you down after a while. And with this system, Adaptive Cruise, it makes it a little bit more refreshed. You're not as tired after when you get there.
And if you combine it with lane keep assist and then also blind spot monitoring, it's really covering you in 3 different axes, from the sides, the rear, the front, and you're able to have a much, well, frankly, a safer driving environment. So that's why they do it. Do I love it? Not really. Can I live without it? Absolutely. It's kind of funny because it's weird when we test these high-end cars, then we go home in our regular cars, which are a little older and don't have those systems. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, this is what it's like to drive a regular car on a regular basis. Wow, I forgot about that.
Okay, one last question.
One last question.
Before we stop today's show. And once again, we're doing these 3 times a week.
Yep.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time.
And they become videos later on, so you can ask a few more questions. We'll jump back on some other time, and hopefully we can answer a couple more questions.
Yes, of course. We'll continue to look at the comments and continue, with the two-way conversation.
Yeah.
The final question is, what is Mazda doing with their speed division? And this is one of my big points too, because I love the Mazda Speed 3.
And the Speed 6, I like.
And the Speed 6, when they had one. They don't have one anymore.
Our buddy Emmy has a Mazda Speed Miata, and
Yep.
it's a little rocket.
And they're not turbocharging, or they're not sure why, but they do have a 2.5 turbo in the CX-9, and a lot of people are asking, why don't they throw that engine into a Mazda 6, call it a Mazda Speed 6, and satisfy a lot of the enthusiasts?
All right, so when you have a small car company and you're building a sports car within that small car company, the market that you're feeding is very small. It's a very small piece of the pie. Mazda did have, and they are really innovative. The RX-8, which was not loved by everybody, I loved driving them, but they had no power. The rotary engine and all that other stuff, it's very expensive to develop. So simply taking an engine and dropping it inside of another vehicle, it takes a lot of engineering. There's a lot more to it than simply just popping it in something. And in order for them to make money at it, they have to be able to sell a certain amount per year to really make a business case out of it. Obviously, they don't see that. What they're trying to do right now is move up market. It's pretty obvious when you look at their interiors. And then they'll have some other new cars that are going to be coming progressively that hopefully will kind of sort of address a little bit of that need for speed. Should they have a new Mazda Speed 3 and a Mazda Speed 6? Hell yeah, of course.
Turbo Miata?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, yes.
Dude, guys, of course we want it to happen. Will it happen? It's looking 50-50 as far as I'm concerned. We've had nothing positive from Mazda for at least the past couple of years about seriously looking into doing sports cars again.
Well, and that's kind of a funny thing because Mazda will tell you that they are doing sports cars. And actually, they're very good at their chassis tuning,
Oh, yeah.
their suspensions, their lightweighting. They're excellent at those things,
Yeah.
right? But in the Miata, when you get it up to high elevation, you need a little bit of extra power and to have a proper experience. So, of course, your point is well taken. You know, smaller company, you have to make money and you have to be profitable. And when all those things happen, and maybe when the company grows, right, they can do more things.
If their sales increase, maybe that'll help them. Maybe they'll finally build their new RX-7 that they've been hinting at, or a new Kodo design, something else. But for now, from what their leadership has been saying, and I've been following it very closely, once again, I'm a little bit of a Mazda fan, it doesn't sound like anything's gonna happen anytime soon.
All right, well, thank you guys for joining us. And once again, we're doing this, or we're trying to do it whenever possible,
Yeah,
Monday,
Monday,
Wednesday,
Wednesday,
Friday
Friday.
at 10 a.m. So please come back and join us. Thank you very much.
Auf Wiedersehen. See you guys.